Every man in this room is a third-generation American. Most of them have never been to Italy. Some of them don't speak a word of the language. And all of them have organized their entire adult lives around an idea of Italian manhood they got from a movie written by a man who had never met a gangster in his life. The Sopranos is usually described as a show about the mafia in decline. I think that's a little off. It's a show about people performing an ethnicity they no longer have direct access to, using a script that was fictional to begin with. And the reason that matters, the reason it's not just a fun observation about Silvio doing Pacino, is that the show uses it to ask a much harder question. What happens to people when the only version of themselves available to them is a performance? Start with how often it happens. Silvio's Michael Corleone bit is a running gag across all 6 seasons. He does it on request, like a party trick, and the other men never get tired of it. Paulie and Pussy have the Godfather I versus I argument the way other men argue about football. When Christopher gets shot, his first instinct is to narrate the event to himself in the language of cinema. The easy read is that this is just texture. Guys like this like these movies. Of course they quote them, but watch what the quoting is actually doing. Nobody in this show ever quotes a movie to be funny. They quote it to settle something. Silvio's impression isn't a joke, it's a liturgy, a shared text the group recites to confirm they're all still the same kind of man. When these characters need to know how to behave in a situation they've never been in, they don't consult a father, or a tradition, or a memory. They consult a film. And that should be strange, because the men in this show supposedly belong to a tradition with actual rules. There's a ceremony for getting made. There's an oath, but notice how little the tradition ever tells anyone what to do, and how much the movies do. Here's the part that turns an observation into an argument. Mario Puzo wrote, "The Godfather in the late 60s broke to make money." He said afterward, more than once, that he had never met a real gangster. He wrote it out of research and invention. The rituals, the code, the idea of the family as a kind of shadow aristocracy with its own honor system. A substantial amount of that is a novelist's construction, dramatized by Coppola into the most influential image of Italian-American life ever produced, and then something genuinely odd happened. Real organized crime figures started talking like the movie. Federal wiretaps from the 70s onward are full of men using vocabulary and self-mythology that traces back to Puzo. The fiction fed back into the thing it was pretending to describe. So when Silvio does Michael Corleone, Follow the Chain, he is imitating Al Pacino, who is playing a character invented by a novelist who had never met anyone like him, in a story about a subculture that subsequently reshaped itself to match the story. There is no original. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. And The Sopranos knows this, which is why it gives Christopher a screenwriting subplot. Christopher wants to make a mob movie. He also wants his own life to have the shape of a mob movie. He complains, in the middle of an actual criminal career, that he doesn't have an arc. He can't tell the difference between living and being depicted. That's not a subplot about Hollywood. That's the show's thesis wearing a leather jacket. Season 2 puts the whole thing to the test by sending them to Italy. Paulie goes expecting a homecoming. He spent his life as the most performatively Italian man in New Jersey. The phrases, the hand gestures, the reverence. He gets to Naples and discovers he's a tourist. He can't communicate. The food he thinks of as his heritage is a New Jersey invention. Nobody there recognizes under that name. He ends up wandering around a country that does not know who he is, and he retreats to a souvenir stall and buys things. The Italians, meanwhile, find them faintly ridiculous. Not offensive, ridiculous. This is the episode where the show stops implying and simply states it. These men are not Italian in the way they believe they are. They are American, with an ancestral costume they've assembled from restaurants, grandmothers, and film. And then the same episode delivers the control group. Furio comes back with them, an actual Neapolitan criminal, and the difference is immediately legible. Furio doesn't perform menace. He doesn't quote anything. He doesn't need a bit. The New Jersey guys are visibly, slightly in awe of him, and what they're in awe of is authenticity. He has the thing they've been impersonating, which sets up the saddest use of it. Carmela falls for Furio, and what she's falling for isn't really a man. It's the real version of a story her whole marriage has been a knockoff of. She married a gangster and got a suburban husband with a temper and a stomach problem. Furio is the fantasy restored to factory settings. Season 4 gives us an entire episode about this and names it, with a straight face, after Christopher Columbus. Silvio is enraged by a Native American protest against a Columbus Day parade. He experiences it as an attack on his people, and the episode very carefully declines to give his outrage any actual content. He can't articulate what Columbus means to him beyond the fact that defending Columbus is what an Italian American is supposed to do. The pride has no object. It's a position inherited from a grievance industry, held because the holding is the identity. Tony, meanwhile, cannot be bothered. Tony is the one character who half sees through the performance. He tells Silvio, in effect, that this is nonsense and that they should be worrying about money, which is more honest and also more corrosive because Tony has nothing to replace it with. He's the guy who's noticed the costume is a costume and keeps wearing it because he doesn't own other clothes. And then the show does something quietly brutal. AJ, who's been taught nothing, comes home from school and reports that Columbus was a slave trader. He says it flatly, without agenda. He has no ethnic feeling about it whatsoever because nothing was ever successfully transmitted to him. The men's ancestral pride survives exactly one generation past the point where anyone knows what it's for. Now let me put the strongest version of the counter-argument, because the show does it for me. Melfi's ex-husband, Richard, spends his scenes furious about exactly this, that Italian-American identity in the popular imagination has been reduced to gangsters, that the image is a defamation, and that people like Tony are the reason. And he's not a straw man. He's substantially correct on the facts. A tiny criminal minority ended up defining an entire population's public image. But notice the show's counter. Richard's own identity has organized itself entirely around resenting the stereotype. He can't stop talking about it. His Italian-Americanness has become an argument about the mafia image, which means that the fiction is generating his identity too, just in negative. There's a second objection worth taking seriously, and it's the better one. All ethnic identity in a diaspora involves performance. Everyone whose grandparents emigrated is working from fragments, a few dishes, a few phrases, a holiday, a feeling. Is The Sopranos really saying anything specific, or is it just describing what assimilation does to everybody? I think the answer is that the show is precise about a particular failure mode. It's not that these men perform. It's what they chose as the script. They had access to real inheritance. Livia and Junior actually remember the immigrant generation, and what they remember is poverty, misery, and a father who was neither noble nor happy. That was available. They didn't want it. They chose the version with the code and the honor and the aristocracy because the real inheritance was humiliating and the fictional one was flattering. That's the specific charge, not that they're inauthentic, that they picked the more comfortable lie and then organized several murders around it. Which brings us back to Tony's most quoted complaint, that he came in at the end, that the best is over. He's mourning something that never happened. His father's life was not a golden age. It was a small, frightened, badly paid criminal career that ended in a family Tony spends 7 seasons in therapy trying to survive. Tony knows this. He has the evidence. He mourns anyway because the mourning is load-bearing. Take away the belief that there was once something worth belonging to, and what's left is a middle-aged man in New Jersey who hurts people for money. That's what the performance is protecting, not a heritage, a self-image. The Italianness, the code, the reverence for the old ways, it's all scaffolding around the refusal to look directly at what he is, and it works. That's the disturbing part. It works well enough to get him to the end of the series, still mostly intact, still able to sit down to dinner with his family, and hear a bell over a door and look up like a man with a life. The costume held.